Vdriven Masterclass. We're going to be talking about freight, as you can see. My name is Wade Yenny. I'm the Vice President of Brand Management Business Development for our organization. Thank you for joining us. With me is Luke Abbott, our CEO, and he's going to be covering the presentation today. We'll have ample time afterwards for you to put in your questions and have some interaction going back and forth with anything we don't cover or anything you'd like us to expand on. I'd encourage you to, throughout the chat or throughout the presentation, if you do have some questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. And then once Luke finishes up, I'll start queuing up the questions so that we can cover those that have submitted questions so far. And we're here for you to help you and support your growth. And so, please don't hesitate to put some questions in. And Luke, let's get started.
I love it. Thank you, Wade, so much. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I appreciate the fact that so many people signed up and are here today. I think freight is one of the most overlooked opportunities for brands today to at least evaluate and ideally to claim additional margin. So, gonna dig in. For those of you that don't know me, I started my career in food space at 21 at a company called Monterey Provision. Started from the bottom, worked my way up. Was able to buy the company in my early 30s, and my team and I scaled it into a national distributor that I sold to KeHE in 2016. Helped lead the fresh division for a couple of years there, and then left to become president of Jimbo's Naturally here in San Diego, and then started Vdriven about 6 years ago. And also been a professor of supply chain at the University of San Diego over the last couple of years. And I am the host of the Reconnected podcast, where we seek to reconnect our supply chain. Encourage you to listen to those episodes. The last one was with Alyssa Vesho from SEP of Whole Foods, talking about Whole Foods and their direction. So let's go further. Today's agenda. Why freight matters. Number 2, when distributors handle freight. 3, freight options. And number 4, from FOB to delivered. And I really wrote this out over the last couple of weeks in a way that it was meant to be extremely actionable. So there's a high level theory, and there's literally let's dig into a couple of options for freight, and I'll literally go through it side by side and give you a lot of pointers. Let's dig in together. So freight matters more than you think. So I used to own a food distributor, and I loved what we called backhaul. And that's where my Monterey trucks would go out and deliver to retail grocery stores, a lot of Sprout stores and Bristol Farms. And then afterwards, those trucks would go visit our manufacturers and pick up product and bring it back to my distribution center. It was huge in terms of the amount of money that I could make as a distributor. And that's how KeHE and Unify and GFI and other distributors operate. Is, hey, it's also not really great for the environment to always have all these empty trucks running around, so let's fill them up. So the goal is to maximize, as a distributor, is to maximize your backhaul income. So an empty truck is $0 a backhaul. A full truck is probably, if you have a full truck coming back, a 53-footer from deliveries, it's at least $4,000 of backhaul freight income. It could be upwards of 6 and even 8,000 in some cases. So I looked at one of the national distributors and ChatGPT, and I determined they have about 600 trucks delivering each day. And if each of those trucks could backhaul on average $4,000, that's $2.4 million a day of backhaul revenue. So I just wanted you to understand, as a distributor, they're not just trying to help you out, right? The freight income they earn that goes into the landed cost of your product at a distribution center, that's almost like free money in some ways. The truck could be coming back empty. Let's fill it up. And I think the challenge is that some distributors sometimes will charge more than I think is reasonable. And that's where the whole premise of this time together today is to dig into that and say, well, are there other options? And as I think about a company in our space, we're really solving for the SRP, right? If $5.99 is really the ideal price for me to achieve my goal velocity at shelf, right, where I'm growing the category, retailers love me, then I really need to be, I'm kind of stuck here. I need to be $5.99. And so I'm thinking backward from that. So if I have, let's say that freight, the cost of freight, doing it myself is about 8%. If I do it through KH Unified, in this example, maybe it's 15%. And so what does that really mean? So the retailer margin is not going to change. Another either example, right? It's 42% from most products in center store. The landed cost of the retailer is always going to be the same, 347, right, to achieve that 599. This is a small retailer we're delivering to, so it's a 22% markup from the distributor to the retailer. And that freight at 18% or 8% versus 15% creates the differential in my margin, right? So my COGS don't change either. It's $1.45 no matter what. And my margin dollars do change. So in this example, the difference between 8% freight and 15% freight is about 16 cents per retail unit in terms of my margin. That's a big deal, right? For most of us. Losing 3.5% of gross margin, the 350 basis points is a big deal for most companies. The alternative, of course, would be maybe I just increase my retail to 639. For many brands, if your ideal price is 599, going to 639 might result in a 10 to 30% reduction in velocity at shelf. At least I keep my gross margin the same at 45%, right? But I'm probably going to really hurt my velocity at shelf. So you kind of thinking this through and remembering that you as a retail brand really need to be focused on that goal SRP. Then it's like, well, what levers can I move to make sure I'm hitting my gross margin? And the one that most people forget about is that freight. And so that's what we're going to dig into more today. So yeah, most brands that I meet default to FOB, and FOB is a legal term, free on board, and it really refers to kind of risk of loss. We use it wrong in our industry. When we say FOB, we almost always mean FOB your dock or your 3PL's dock. Um, Truly FOB is like when the risk of loss transfers, and it could be FOB the distributor's dock, but we never really use FOB that way. So when I say FOB in this presentation, I'm referring to you are pickup with your distributor. They pick it up from you or from your warehouse. When you let your distributor pick up from you, and especially when you're in a more of a national setting, right? You have longer lead times between the time that the product is picked up from you until the time it gets to the distribution center, to its final distribution center. And the example there would be if I'm here in San Diego and Kay's picking up from me, they're going to pick up from me on a backhaul. They're going to bring that product back to the Chino distribution center. And then whatever needs to be used in Chino will be put away. And then let's say I need to go to, the Douglasville at Georgia distribution center. Well, then on a space available basis, that product will sit at Chino until there's space, and then it'll move across the country. That process of getting it across the country can take 3.5 weeks. And so there's the lead time you gave Kahi of saying, hey, I need 3 weeks for you to pick up from me. And then another 3 weeks for to get across the country, like 6 weeks. It's really long. And that also means you don't get paid very quickly. So it takes you 3 weeks to get to Douglasville in Georgia, you don't get paid. The 2% 10-day terms don't start until that product arrives in Georgia in Douglasville and then gets put away, and then 10 days starts, which means that on average, most brands that are FOB are getting paid, in my experience, in about 35 to 38 days, where if you delivered it, you have a higher probability of being paid in fewer than 20 days. So that's something to be really thinking about. You also may have higher freight charges, and I get it. You don't pay the freight directly, but remember, we have this goal SRP we're trying to achieve, and in order to achieve it, we got to adjust what we're charging our distributor to make that happen, or work with EDLPs. So it's a higher freight charges really either affect you in velocity or affect you in margin as you charge a lower price to achieve the goal SRP at shelf. Really important points there. So any questions on that, feel free to ask them. Risk of loss or damage during internal transfers. We operate a deduction management division at Vdriven, and the number one dollar size deductions we see are where K and Unify are picking up from your dock and then they lose product along the path. even though I mentioned FOB normally refers to risk of loss, the contract that you signed with Unify and KeyHe allows everything they pick up to be subject to count at their distribution center, and they lose product, especially if it has to cross dock somewhere. It happens all the time, way more than I'd like it to, and it's a crazy amount of money people lose. So when you entrust your distributor with it, you can, it can cost you thousands or tens of thousands of dollars if they start losing your product. Yeah, the SRP changes. This has happened to me way too many times where a brand is FOB, where the Sprouts buyer, I work with Sprouts at our brokerage division, and be like, hey, our SRP changed, our retail price at shelf changed. And it's like we didn't change the price to the distributor. Well, the distributor did a analysis of their freight and then they decided to just increase it. And so I don't control my SRP anymore. Things just happen, right? And that's not fun. So just keep on going. So owning your own freight, so control of your landed costs. You can control your landed costs, and I'll explain that in a second when you're FOB, but it can cost you though. Faster delivery, which also, as I said earlier, gives you better cash flow and also reduces spoilage. Because you're theoretically when you're delivering, you could potentially cut the lead time in half, and your product will it helps the distributor to order more accurately, which if you have a shorter shelf life product could reduce spoilage. Reduce out of stock risk. I'll explain this supply chain concept of bullwhip in the next slide. But I can just tell you the longer the lead time, the more variations happen all the way through the supply chain and result in out of stocks and inefficiencies. And like, hey, we're producing big POs and then we produce nothing for 2 months. And then we produce big POs and all because of this bullwhip effect. Reduce loss claims, like I was mentioning on the last slide. If you do own your own freight, you tend to have less risk. You tend to have fewer issues with product just not making it to destination and then having to cover that cost. And then, as I said, protection from unpredictable freight factor changes, where a large distributor just changes the freight, and then your SRPs all whacked in at retail. So bullwhip, for those of you that studied supply chain, you totally have heard this term before. It's this idea of as consumers' demand vacillates a little bit, right? With the retailer, their demand back to the distributor becomes even more ups and down, like higher highs, lower lows. The distributor, for that same level of demand change to the end consumer, becomes even more gyrating. And then to the manufacturer, more steps and the more lead time lead to these crazy ups and downs and also out of stocks. So the idea here is that if I can reduce lead time by delivering, I reduce the bullwhip effect. I keep my in-stock better. I reduce spoilage if I have a shorter shelf life product, and everyone's happier. And I'll just say this one thing. I had lunch the other day with the leader of all grocery for one of the two national natural retailers, and I asked him, like, what is the one thing that you want brokers to do better? And it related directly to this, is like really owning the supply chain. He said it's crazy how many out of stocks that we have and the fill rates that we get from the distributors. And the distributors are saying they're just having a really hard time figuring out demand. Well, yeah, of course it's hard to figure out demand when it takes 6 weeks for a product to actually get to a distribution center. So when we can deliver, we can help make everyone happier and improve your sales and probably increase your velocity over time. So let's keep going. So when to consider owning your own freight: when you have 20 or more stores out of each distribution center with a distributor, that's usually a good time just to be looking at it. You were launching into a large multi-DC retailer. So I handle the Sprouts account for Vdriven. Um, and whenever someone's launching into Sprouts, I really challenge the brand to be looking at looking at what their freight costs are versus what KeHe charges. If you're launching natural grocers, Whole Foods, Fresh Market, that's just a great time to be doing that analysis. If product is frozen, and so I said, I work with Sprouts a lot, and when I'm working with a frozen buyer, they're putting in a massive freight rate. So I'll give them my FOB price to the category manager at Sprouts, and then they have like a 20 something percent freight factor that KeHe is going to put on there, which it's not going to cost us, if I own my own freight in general, 20 something percent of my underlying costs of the product. So in frozen, I haven't seen as as crazy pricing with refrigerated and dry, or ambient, but frozen, I would almost never do that, having it the FOB. And then I'd say anytime. Like, why not compare what the distributor is charging versus what it would cost you to other, yeah, versus what it costs you to use other carriers. I would say this. I have had brands that have gone back and said, hey, what is my freight cost? We're looking at delivering, and then they do a freight evaluation, and then they actually increase the freight rates, and that's a problem, right? So just be aware that this is a profit center, that they're constantly looking for ways to increase it. When you start digging into it, it could result in an increase. So you it'd be really good if you already have done your own analysis with what's available in the market for you to deliver, not using the distributor before you ask the distributor, about potentially switching. So when distributors handle freight, so like, why do people handle freight? I can pretty much like torched the idea, but there are reasons, and we have a lot of our brands. We have up to over 70 brands we work with at Vdriven, and um, you know, we have, here's why those brands do go FOB sometimes. One less thing to manage. Like a lot of companies, especially emerging brands, only have one person, and you're already strapped in time, and you don't have any extra capacity. I get it. Simplified billing. Well, in this case, there's actually no billing, right? It's built into the landed cost of the product. Built-in network access. It's just this idea of simplicity of just going through the KE or Unify supply chain. Definitely time savings. Think about it. Fewer missed appointments is an interesting one. When you go deliver, of course, when KE picks up, of course, KE receives them when they get back. When you're delivering, you have to go through a system of booking an appointment, dock appointment. That's usually handled by the carrier, but there may not be space available. And if the customer you're delivering for, like, let's say you're delivering for like just Bristol Farms is the only customer you have, that may not be enough to get an expedited dock appointment if the dock is overloaded. So that could be a challenge. Generally, for example, again, with me working at Sprouts, I can reach out to someone at KeHE and say, hey, this product's for Sprouts. Please make sure this product gets received, based on the normal lead time. Um, Less expertise required. Yeah, nothing to think about when they pick up. And lower upfront freight commitments. There's no commitment. They just pick up from you. So that those would be the reasons. So it's not wrong. Just recognize that if you're not doing the evaluation, you may be paying more than you should, especially when you are trying to target a goal SRP. So options to manage freight. This one I'll just go slowly through. I think it's really important. So first off, this idea of, like, I can go just FOB, and I don't ask the distributor to do anything else but just go FOB with me. The distributor picks it up. The landed cost would be different by DC. So a lot of people don't realize that when KeHE or Unify are picking up and it's cross-docking going to DCs across the country, is my landed cost to every DC will be different based on what the freight rates are and the amount of product going to each of those DCs. There's no bill backs or anything. It just goes into the landed cost. It raises the price to the retailer. And as I said earlier, it could result in a higher SRP than you want. It's simple. There's no freight planning needed. And the cons would be unpredictable landed costs. One DC, I could be landing at the perfect price I want in order to hit the goal SRP, but at another, it could be way above that, and that could be challenging. So it's really difficult in that situation to align SRPs across regions. There is the ability, I believe, with both distributors. And again, this stuff changes all the time, but as far as I know, you could be FOB and you could tell the distributor, I want to have one landed cost nationally. In that situation, it's the same thing as FOB. They pick up and they bring it back to their DCs. But then you're saying, I want to have, let's say it's $2. I want to be landed cost of $2 per retail unit at every DC nationally. They're like, great, no problem. Whenever the landed cost is more than $2, let's say it's $2.20, they'll bill you back and charge you to bill you back the 20 cents per unit to get back down to the $2 to make sure that you're controlling your landed cost. So it simplifies things in that you always will have one landed cost. Your SRP should be pretty standard across the country. You are going to get deductions, and ideally you're going to be really monitoring that and also accruing for it, so you're not surprised as these deductions come from you. Again, the benefit is you are in control of your SRP, and of course there's other nuances to that and other choices you can make. Those are the two that we usually see. And then the third option certainly is delivered pricing, where you deliver it to the DC, and you can choose to have the same price by DC or different prices by DC. And it again gives you full control over landed costs to the distributor. Because again, when the distributor picks it up and they put on their freight, that freight can change at will, right? And so that if I'm controlling it, I can control my landed costs. I can control better what my SRPs are across the country. So freight options. So this is where I get a little bit more into detail. So let's say I do want to deliver it. Number one is if I'm, if I'm massive, I'm going to be full truckload, right? That's probably not applicable to anybody here today. If it is, congratulations. Most people would either be less than truckload or consolidated. LTL freight, great actually for emerging mid-sized brands. It's flexible, it's scalable. It can be really expensive, especially if you're shipping like one pallet. The cost per pallet could be 4x, 5x, 6x that it would cost you on a per pallet basis for a full truckload. It can be a little bit slower too. Sometimes these LTL trucks are shipping into a region or a city. It goes into a terminal. They're trying to figure out how to efficiently get it to the destination, the distribution center like for KU Unify, and it's just I don't know. This is not optimal, but it can work if you're going to manage it or if you have a great broker managing it for you. Consolidated freight is effectively LTL, but I see it as different. It's cost effective and faster than LTL because in consolidation, it's often, hey, and I'll give you a couple examples in a couple of slides. In consolidation, ideally, I have a lot of brands that are all going to the Cahey Douglasville distribution center, and I'm putting them all in the same truck. And instead of being just standard LTL, I get something somewhat closer to full truckload pricing versus less than truckload pricing. And it's usually for many of the companies that do this type of consolidated freight, they have a truck that always leaves on a Monday and always arrives on a Thursday, right? It's something that's predictable. It's something that it's a lot easier to manage and is lower cost. So where I can do consolidation into distributor DCs, that is the biggest one I can get. And I recommend that if you don't know a consolidator, it's really even hard to search on Google. Just ask other brands that are in your temperature class, like, hey, how are you getting your ambient product there? And just until you get as you talk to other brands, many of them will have insights and that can be really helpful to you because the difference in price between doing this standard commercial, common carrier less than truckload versus consolidated can be a huge difference in price. So where I want to do consolidated. And I wanted to give you a very specific example. I've had brands who have used Echo and brands that have used organic logistics for moving refrigerated freight across the country. Both of them do an excellent job. There's people that swear by Echo and people that swear by organic logistics. And I'm just thinking, like, if I was you, like how I would look at these two different companies. So I'm going to kind of do this deep dive with you quickly here. Echo is a publicly traded company. Organic Logistics is owned by Organic Valley, and it's owned by a cooperative. So they actually are a bit more purpose driven. I've found asset based. This is a really good question. Probably many of you have never heard the word before. Asset based means, does the company that I'm working with actually own the trucks and trailers or lease the trucks and trailers, or are they actually using other people's trucks and trailers to get there? And there's benefits and disadvantages to either option. And Echo, they're not asset based as far as I know. They're a non-asset based broker with a vast carrier network, but they build out these consolidation loads across the country that are really cost efficient. And if there's a need to scale up, they can easily add in more other carriers or other trucks into their network because it isn't like they need to go buy another one. They can just use another one that exists in the market. Organic Logistics is asset based. They have their own temperature controlled fleet. And so it works fine, and I've never had any issues with it. But theoretically, there could be a challenge where there's more freight than they actually have room in their tractor trailers to hold. Then whose pallet gets left behind? Is my question. Let's keep on going down here. They're both refrigerated. Um, I love how Organic Logistics, they really target emerging CPG brands. So if you're really young, OL, I call them OL for short, is a great option. Um, Sustainability, eco, fewer miles, terminal free, less handling. Organic logistics, as you might imagine, as this, organic focus, organic valley cooperative is really into reducing their carbon footprint. It's part of their core mission. So just some thoughts. So by the way, in both of these scenarios, you do not need to have a freight broker in between you and Echo or in between you and organic logistics. You can just go directly to these guys and work this out. And then you're not paying a freight broker. And I guess in a way, Echo is, as I said, they are a broker, but they're also doing this consolidation, which makes them really unique and special. So I see them as it's kind of like a broker plus, and where organic logistics is asset based. They own their trucks and trailers. So anyway, there's a couple of options, and I would encourage you as you're looking to say you're ambient, and you can find a couple of consolidation options. Look at these comparisons and make your best decision on how to proceed. So brokers, we had a brand that just launched at Sprouts nationally, and the broker is a really good friend of mine, Rodney. I'd be happy to connect anyone to him to reach out to me afterwards. But he was amazing. He worked through LTL carriers across the country to get the product there. There was a lot of last minute changes because of production challenges, and he was on it. He was working crazy hours. So freight brokers can be your best friend. They can secure better rates than you. They often are moving a lot of volume and can negotiate more than you could on your own. They have access to carriers nationwide. They handle the dispatching, like the coordinating with the trucks, the scheduling, the track and trace, the issue resolution. So you don't have a lot of time. Um, Freight brokers can really save you a lot of time. Integrated TMS, transportation management system, is like even sometimes the ability to have visibility on where your load is. Sometimes even the temperature that they were able to maintain can be like live shared with you and then tracked over time. Often analytics dashboards, claims management, EDI capability. So I said before, if you find good consolidators, often you don't need the broker. But where you don't have a strong consolidator relationship, I highly recommend working with a freight broker to help you. And then other things to think about, that again, when you're FOB, you're a doc, you don't have to think about this stuff, but um, there is fuel surcharges often calculated on a weekly basis and as a percentage applied to the base rate you're given. It's something to be aware of. You'll want to really check with that carrier, like, hey, what have been the fuel surcharges over the last couple of years? Let me understand what the highs and the lows can be. Detention and accessorial charges. Detention's when a truck goes in to deliver to a KHE or Unified Distribution Center and they're held up for multiple hours. After a certain point, there's an hourly detention charge that's added. So this is where like consolidators or carriers that have really good relationships with KE and Unify can really be your best friend, because that they probably get priority in delivering and avoid these detention challenges. Accessorial charges could be a charge. It could be all the charges beyond anything I've mentioned. It can be lumping fees. There could be the cost to book a dock appointment. It could be anything. So it's great to just ask the carrier, what is the all-in cost? Show me all the, accessorial charges. Talk to me about detention. And when have how often are you having to pay, or how often are you incurring detention situations with these specific distribution centers with these companies? There's also seasonal rate fluctuations. So I didn't say to my introduction, I used to own a common carrier company. So I was a trucking company at one point, and you know, gosh, coming out of California during the produce season, there would be no trucks available because all the trucks were moving produce out of California. So during the produce season, it is crazy what freight rates do here. So it's really good for you when one idea would be to negotiate lock-in rates if you can lock them in while the seasonal fluctuations at its lowest. And then certainly to get a full understanding of what freight rates look like over an entire year. A lot of the consolidators, by the way, the freight rates ideally are the same throughout the year. When we're going to common carriers to move our product, like LTL, for example, and maybe when I'm not using a broker and I can't negotiate, you're just kind of subject to the whims of what's happening in the market, and that can be okay, but you kind of want to know what that means, and you'll want to ask them what the rates have been over the last couple of years. But making the shift from FOB to delivered, as I said, I really, really recommend that you would do the research first and find out like, hey, what freight rates can you achieve. I also recommend that you not where you can figure out and back into what the freight rates that the distributor is adding in are yourself, and then can do that comparison before you ever bring it up to your distributor. That's a good thing. So again, as I said earlier, I've had brands go to the distributor and say, hey, they're looking at making these changes. And then the distributor does a freight analysis. And then I had one brand where they 3x to their freight. So I don't want to walk in there and not have an option already figured out. So that if you need help and how to figure that out, that'd be something like your broker could do, something that we help our brands do. We usually can figure based like out of Sprouts, I know what the margins are that they're charging. I can work my way backward and I can really see what that landed cost was. And I know what your FOB price was. So I can then compute what that freight rate is. So that's something just to be really, really aware of. So don't just go in there flying blind and just telling your distributor, I think I can do better. and, and then and then you can't, and then you're stuck. So something to really be aware of. So identify current freight costs, research the market options, like what's available out there freight wise. Compare landed costs from what you find in the market to what the FOB is, and what the distributor is adding. And then you would present that analysis to the distributor's category manager. The category manager, to their goal is to try to certainly make you happy, but also to make money, right? So they're going to say, hey, great, I'm glad you presented this to me. Let me go back to my freight department. Let's see if we can do it for those rates, or would this actually be a savings or not? And then assuming that it would be either the same price or a savings, then they usually allow you to make that transition, and that transition time can be 30 to 90 days. So you can't just do it tomorrow. It takes time for all the transitions to happen in the systems. But I would say this, for the brands that I work with who have moved to delivered from FOB, in general, all of them were able to be in a better position. All the ones I'm referring to are ones that had national accounts like Whole Foods or Sprouts, where there's enough volume that it all makes sense, right? I think there's a point where I'm opening up a KeHE or Unified Distribution Center, and I only have, 10 store doors where it might actually make sense to have Unify and KeHE pick up, right? And that might be the best rate I can even find anywhere in the market. So this is nuanced, and you want to be careful about it. And I truly believe you can do it for less and have more control of your SRP, get your cash faster, and like all the benefits I said if you deliver it yourself. So yeah, so as I said, freight isn't just logistics, it's a pricing lever, because as brands, we're thinking about SRP and often working backward. Owning your own freight gives you margin, velocity, ideally more margin, ideally more velocity, because you're controlling your SRP better and control over your supply chain. But I'm saying number three is so important. Know your options, run the numbers, really try to have an idea of what KeHE and Unify are building in for freight, and then compare that to what you're able to get in the market before you approach your distributor. And that's it. Now we have 25 minutes for questions and answers. Wade,
All
back to
right.
you.
Great. Thank you, Luke. Good stuff. And just one question I had, and because, I have some experience in freight from my retail days, but I wanted to ask, when you said the distributor category manager, just for clarity on my end, that's literally the distributor category manager, not your
Mhm.
supplier relationship manager.
Correct. Well,
Okay.
SRM is Unify, and then category manager is what KeHE calls them.
Hey, got it. Got it.
Same role.
Okay, I wanted to clarify that for those of you that are listening. So we do have a couple questions so far, and if you're just to reiterate, if you have questions, put them in the chat. I'm just gonna just go down the line here. We have two so far, but please put them in. I will get to them as we go through. So first one's from Jacob. He says, "I'm noticing an increasing amount of brands that have complaints about distributors resulting from fees. Is there a way for small brands to find the same buyers without working with a distributor?"
Yeah, there are ways, and especially if you're in like health and beauty, and some stores do allow you just to ship UPS in. That is possible. There's also like even if I'm working with a Sprouts, for example, like I can, if I'm not having a not so good experience with KeHE and maybe I'm doing a lot more business with Unify is a secondary, or I could try to go through a Pod Foods, right? There's often other answers. Typically, if you're center store or perimeter of the store, you're really in general stuck using a distributor, and usually you're better off using the one that is the primary distributor. So again, like a Sprouts example, KeHE's primary, Unify is secondary. And we have brands where, because they do so much volume and the freight is so much more efficient in the Unified, that even with Unify's higher markup to Sprouts, they end up being a cheaper landed cost to the retailer. So this is also nuanced, right? There's no one answer. And again, we're happy to dig into specifics as we answer these questions.
Yeah, and I think Luke, as I'm advising Brandon, something that talking about it from our brokering side of Vdriven, we don't dictate to our brands or our clients the method of distribution to get into the retailers. We want to meet our retailers where they're at and who are their choices, right? And if it's a
Mhm.
local or regional launch in Southern California, you might have some DSD options or something like that. But inevitably, as you scale and grow across the country, you're 9 times out of 10 going to be talking about a KeHE or Unify for these larger retailers in multi-states, right? And
Yep,
that's
yep,
by their direction, not certainly not
mhm,
ours, right? So,
yep. It's
but
totally.
yeah. So next question is from Rob Doolin. What's your point of view on using KeHE Unify's preferred carriers, examples T-Force and ABF versus non-preferred?
Yeah, and this is something that I need to do more research on myself. My understanding is there's certain carriers that are able to do what they call them. They would basically leave the trailer in their, at the DC, and then K can receive their Unify can receive it at will. That ability is great, and they didn't have the ability to expedite off those trailers. Um, I think what I was referring to this earlier. When you have a carrier that has a deep relationship with the distributor, that is a huge advantage to you, especially when I talk about those other accessorial charges and detention charges. If K Unify are not motivated to receive your product, and you're using some carrier that they don't know and doesn't understand their system, their systems, then you're putting yourself at risk. Where I love consolidators that go to, from like Southern California to every DC every week, and they have the relationships. They've been doing it for years. They know the systems. That's usually where I want to go.
Nice. Great. Okay, next one's from Tim Wang with Kiefer Cult. He asks, would you recommend that brands have a single delivered price across DCs so that their SRP is consistent across geographies? Should this be based on the most expensive DCs to service or some average of the
Average.
freight costs
Mm,
across
yeah.
DCs?
Yeah, generally, as I said early on, I think it was like my second, third slide, is like we're solving for an SRP, right? And there's an SRP that is optimal for our product that's gonna ideally maximize margin and grow the category, and everyone's happy. So I'm solving for that. And so usually that does mean I need to have a set single delivered price across the country is optimal. For the brands the bigger brands that we work with, the ones that are 10, 20, 30 million, $40 million a year in volume, almost all of them do a single landed cost to DCs across America, whether it's pickup or delivered. And any brand that's that big is almost always delivered. So I'd say as a younger brand, I often see them just FOB, and they don't want to deal with it, and they don't want to deal with the deductions that come when they're FOB, and there's a pickup, and printing the same landed cost will result in deductions from K and Unify. Um, it's usually just the younger brands that do it, but I'd say it's not optimal. Optimal is to have one SRP, sorry, one landed cost that gets you to your target SRP across the country. That would be best in class.
And then Luke, the second part of that is, so are they basing it on the most expensive DCs
You
and
should,
kind of
well,
working backwards,
Well,
or
no, I'm working backward from the goal SRP and understanding the average gross margin of the retailer,
okay,
right? And then I might run into a constraint of, gosh, I'm only earning a 20% gross margin or on this, and it's not going to work. Then I might have to just go back and say, well, I'll adjust my SRP higher. I get my velocity won't be optimal, but it is what it is. So again, I'm thinking everything from an SRP standpoint, and
right?
whatever that needs to be, that's what I'm going to do,
Got it. Got it.
unless I
Okay.
can't afford to do it, then I'll
Right.
adjust.
Right. Okay. Great. Yeah, and I think so far those are the questions we have. We'll see if anything else comes up here. And just again, a reminder. I think the earlier on the podcast, listen, this is where I'm going.
Masterclass.
Earlier on in the masterclass, we talked about Luke's podcast. I'm going to put the link into his podcast there in the chat, and then also for those of you who don't know, I also do a podcast on Fridays called CPG Vibes that's live on LinkedIn. I'll put the link in here for that as well. Um, Next up, we do have a question for Andre. It says, thanks for the great insights. How can we get in touch with freight brokers? And I think that's a good segue, Luke, because you mentioned one, and I'm pretty sure he's in the chat right now, or
Oh, is he? Is
he's in the
Rodney
audience.
here?
Rodney is
Oh,
here.
good. Yeah, Rodney Bonds was the one I was talking about where we had I've known him for years. He actually was a senior executive at Sprouts. That's where I met him originally. And then after he left Sprouts, he started his own, effectively, I wouldn't even say he was a broker so much as like this kind of freight management consultant slash broker. And he's helped out a number of our brands in moving product through. If you feel free to reach out, just go to our website. There'll be a little box and you can just enter your information and I will connect you to Rodney.
And
He's
actually, it
amazing
looks like Luke
resources.
Rodney came
Thank you, gentlemen.
off mute. So I was going to ask him. It looks like you wanted to
Mhm.
say something. Rodney, go ahead.
No, I'd say thank you very much for the introduction and was be more than willing to. And I've worked with multiple and Luke and team have shared contacts. So be happy to do so in the future with other brands.
I
Great.
love it. And Rodney, I'll put it out there. One of the things that Rodney and I are dreaming about in the next 3 to 5 years is for Vdriven to have its own consolidation arm as we grow and our brands grow and we have enough volume. And with my background in food distribution and operating distribution centers and trucking companies, and Rodney's experience setting up distribution centers across America and running freight. So our dream is to get that done. So Rodney, let's do it.
Great. And
Let's
so
make it happen. Let's make it happen, Luke.
we have a comment from someone we know very well, Dave Soul,
Yep.
Luke, and he says, on our last delivery to Kahee, I ran the numbers and it was cheaper to send a bunch of POs on one truck, even though a few of the POs were going to be
Uh,
about 7 days early, and there may be an early delivery fee. Do you see possible issues here? By the way, here's another plug for Rodney. We use Rodney and love him. So, and this is
it's
a
good.
refrigerated product. I'm assuming, Dave, we're talking about refrigerated product, I think. But
Yeah.
what do you say there, Luke?
So the number one is if you've attended my master classes recently, I talk about the importance of being friends with your buyer at KH Unify, the person that is responsible for issuing the POs. In order for you not to have penalties and issues or be turned away at the dock or not even be able to get a dock appointment, the buyer needs to put in this date range upon which they're okay to receive the product. If you're wanting to deliver early, that obviously isn't great for K here Unify because they need to manage space, right? And you're coming in earlier than they expect. You're creating, the constraint of space is a challenge for them. You being friends with that buyer at that distributor, you sending them Christmas cards, samples, showing them that you see them as a human being and you care is your best opportunity to get them to work with you relative to being able to deliver late or early. It's the number one thing I recommend. I do not recommend that you just ship something in without having a conversation with the buyer, because you run the risk of being turned away. So that would be my advice on that, Dave.
Got it. Got it. And any concerns? I know we're not talking about high perishability here, but any concerns along those lines with if, using that example that Dave gave that 7 days early, if it's let's just say for discussion's sake, a perishable product that has 30 to 40
Yeah.
days shelf life and you're 7 days early, does that factor into the equation as well?
If your shelf life would change because of delivering 7 days earlier, it would be the same because you did one run a month and it doesn't matter, then it might not matter. But to your point, yes. Spoilage is something that's a big deal. It's not really the scope of this call, but I just want to make sure you understand that many of you are being asked to give 3 and 4% ongoing, effectively OI allowances or bill back allowances to make up for spoilage. And then you also, if your spoilage experience is higher than that, they can come back and deduct that from you. Be really, really cognizant of shelf life going in. And also remember, I think it's 75% is what's required today of shelf life you must have when your product is being delivered, or you will be turned away or experience a penalty. So that shelf life factor is really important.
Great, great. And I think we're caught up with questions. I see Jared came off mute. Jared, How are you?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a quick comment to kind of echo some of that. I actually started my career at a 3PL, so I have some experience in the inside of a third-party logistics company, non-asset based, but also ran the back end of our logistics as a fill-in for Cool House Ice Cream, so frozen
Oh
logistics.
yeah.
So I have a lot of experience with it. And just one like antidote or words of wisdom is in line with kind of what we're talking about is over communicate with that SRM on like delivery dates if you're going to be late, if you're going to be early. But what I also figured out, and I was getting these consistent late charges from our distributors, and I knew I was shipping it in time. I knew it was getting out to the warehouses, but for some reason, we're always one day off on our deliveries, and we kept getting late charges. So after a little bit of research and figuring it out and really over communicating and digging into it, and it was pretty obvious, but it might not be as obvious when you're getting started, is make sure you're communicating with your trucking company as well. Because a lot of the times, especially if you're managing your freight and you have a dedicated provider, they have standing appointments with
Yes.
distributors.
Good
So
point.
if you don't communicate to your SRM that, hey, I'm working with X carrier and they have a standing appointment with you guys every Thursday at 10 a.m. and your appointment's every Wednesday at 10 a.m., you're going to get late charges and that's disconnect. However, the SRM does have the ability to update your delivery time to align with that consistent truck. So that's just a
They do.
key to avoid by just over communicating to your SRM and watching, what's going on with your freight. So that was just a comment, but yeah, I love the presentation, Luke. A lot of really helpful stuff, especially living in the world for a little bit. I can definitely relate to a lot of the things you put into this presentation.
Thank you, Jared. I really appreciate your comments on that, and I fully aligned. And I remembered a term that I had forgotten earlier. It's called a drop trailer. So some carriers have worked out with K Unify where they have a certain day they drop a trailer, and it's what's great about that is it's great for Unify and KE because they can just receive it when they have space, but you also don't run the risk of detention charges, right? Because they don't have a human being waiting there to be received. The trailer is just left at the yard and is picked up later. So drop trailers is one thing you could ask a common carrier or a consolidator about is, do you do drop trailers? Do you have, like Jared said, you have set days that you're there? It's a great thing to ask. That way you could, as Jared said, work with the SRM or the buyer to make sure that there is alignment and that your account is updated.
Great. I'm looking to see. I think we're caught up on questions. So please, if you have any, put them in the chat, or you're welcome to come off mute and ask them verbally if you'd like.
Throw one more little comment on there that I think just learned by doing, eventually really got good with, is definitely watch your BOLs and have a standard practice for your BOLs, a bill of lading, to make sure that you might get charged a shortage and see where those shortages might have happened. If you have that BOL, it's kind of that golden ticket a lot of the times for your proof, so to speak. I would even argue sometimes your own dock workers, it's worth not only having the signed BOL, but taking some pictures of
Yes.
before it leaves the warehouse. So just another little comment that I think will become more and more proactive because I've dealt with claims, I've dealt with lost product, I've worked in -20 degree, frozen where ice cream claims, and there's a lot of finger pointing. So just always having as much proactive work and data to support you is going to make that claim process a lot easier.
Jared, that's a really good point. It's something I actually intended to have in one of my slides, is talking about the importance of holding out those BOLs. The BOLs are everything. If you lose that BOL and something goes on, you'd be in really big trouble. The idea of taking pictures is something that we do deduction management, as I mentioned earlier, for our clients, and that's something we tell all of our clients. Take pictures of every pallet, every side of it on the truck, with the driver picking it up. Because again, with the contract you signed with K Unify, when you're FOB your dock, they have their right of final count at their dock. So the BOL almost means nothing. What matters is what they count at the dock. But if you have picture evidence that documents, and your ties are standard on your pallets, right? Like hey, it was there. You guys lost the pallet. You guys lost 3 ties. We almost always win those if we have the pictures. So that's something really, really important. That's a great point, Charlie.
Definitely. Okay. Any other questions? I know we have a few minutes left here. answer. And just as a reminder, we do these free sessions every month, sent out via our newsletter, announced on LinkedIn from both Luke and myself. You can scan that to make sure you're signed up. Our next class is going to be on trade spend, I'm told. So that should be a fun one to talk about. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about the analysis and the goods, the bads, the uglies, the otherwise. So that should be fun. But yeah, we, Luke's mentioned several times throughout, we as an organization do a variety of services for our clients. We do deduction management. We do hourly accounting. We do consulting, and that could be a number of things, whether it's due diligence, whether it's go-to-market strategy, whether it's just a long project, short project, you name it. With Luke's experience, the various members of our team with the different backgrounds, we're here to support you and your needs. And then, of course, we have our sales and brand management brokering side of the business. So if you'd like to reach out, we'd encourage you to do that. Luke, what did we miss?
Yeah, I think on that next masterclass, I just wanted to make a quick statement to the group on this is that we have one of our oldest clients. We were very successful. We, Whole Foods nationally, Sprouts nationally, every natural grocers, fresh market, and have been using the same promotional program year to year to year, like 6 promos a year, 6 promos a year, and then we went back and looked and did a deep dive and realized that we weren't getting the same post promotional lift, and that we were seeing a lift during promo but not after. And we realized that what was going on is that we were mature in that set that we were in. We claimed all the consumers. We were there for 5 years, right? And most of these retailers. And then we learned that, when we do an off shelf where our product is in a secondary placement opportunity, that we claimed new consumers, and the post promotional lift, even though the off shelf was so much more expensive, the post promotional lift more than paid for it over a 6-month period. So it just really got me thinking that, us as a company, and then us just sharing out to the community how important it is to really be intentful and to be able to analyze what we're doing in promotion. So I encourage everybody to attend. We have a great data analytics team at Vdriven that's putting together the deck. And I think it'll have some really good insights for everybody.
Yeah, that's the great points, and I can speak again from the retailer perspective and firsthand experience. Your larger organizations typically have analysts or departments within their organizations that do that same analysis on their end for the retailer perspective. Pre-post analysis. How were things pre-promotion? How did the promotion go? And the post analysis to see what the lift was. So they're doing it, and it makes a lot of sense for you to do it as well for the exact reason Luke just said. So, okay. Any other questions? We have a few minutes, whether you come off mute or put them in the chat, we can do it. And otherwise, we can probably wrap it up.
I get to have lunch now. This is good.
All right.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next month.